Thailand as we know it should not exist. Twice in its history, its great capitals, Ayutthaya and later Bangkok, were burned or besieged, their monuments reduced to ash and rubble. Ambitious neighbors carved away its borders, while powerful foreign empires hovered overhead, waiting for their chance to dominate. By all logic, this should have been a fractured land, swallowed by colonization or civil war. Yet somehow, against all odds, Thailand not only survived, it endured, adapted, and continuously reinvented itself. The key to understanding this resilience lies in Thailand's extraordinary ability to absorb and reshape external influences. Rather than simply imitating foreign models, the Thai elite reimagined imported religions, legal systems, and trade structures, weaving them into a uniquely local framework. What emerged was not a copy of India, China, or Europe, but a kingdom with its own distinctive identity, one that was flexible enough to survive crisis after crisis. Long before there was anything called Thailand, Southeast Asia was a patchwork of small human groups living off the land. These were hunter-gatherers moving seasonally, following rivers and forests for food. For thousands of years, people here lived in ways not so different from others across the world, leaving behind stone tools and traces of fire pits as the earliest evidence of their presence. But what sets this region apart is how early it began to experiment with something far more transformative than hunting: farming. From about 3500 BCE, the cultivation of rice began to take root. This discovery places the ancestors of modern Thailand among the very first rice farmers anywhere on Earth. Rice did not simply provide food, it reshaped how people lived. Groups that once moved often now began to settle near fertile river valleys, laying down roots that would define the region's future. These river valleys, most notably the Mekong and the Chao Phraya, were not just locations for farming. They became natural highways that allowed movements of goods and ideas long before kingdoms arose. These waterways created connections between small communities that otherwise would have remained isolated. Archaeologists have found that pottery styles, burial practices, and tools spread between these regions, hinting at early networks of exchange. Burial sites reveal fascinating details about how these people thought. Grave goods, such as decorated pots or well-crafted ornaments, were carefully placed with the deceased. Such practices suggest the beginnings of social hierarchies, where certain individuals were marked out with more elaborate offerings than others. These subtle clues point toward increasing complexity in society. If there is one site that captures the prehistoric importance of this land, it is Ban Chong. Today, it is recognized by UNESCO as a World Heritage Site, but long before such recognition, it was only an unassuming village until extraordinary discoveries were made there. Excavations revealed a treasure trove of pottery, tools, and skeletons, dating back thousands of years. Most importantly, they uncovered bronze artifacts that shattered long-standing historical assumptions. For decades, historians believed the Bronze Age began in places like Mesopotamia or China. Yet Ban Chong proved that bronze working existed here as early as 2000 BCE, possibly even earlier than in those so-called birthplaces of civilization. The people of Ban Chong crafted tools and weapons strong enough for farming and hunting, but they also created jewelry and ornaments, a sign that artistry and social identity were already thriving alongside practical needs. The pottery of Ban Chiang adds another layer to this story. Painted in swirling spirals, wave-like patterns, and rhythmic curves, these vessels are among the most recognizable prehistoric artifacts in Southeast Asia. What makes them remarkable is not only their age, but their lasting cultural impact. These designs remain so iconic that Thai school children today often reproduce them as part of their education. It is a reminder of how even distant ancestors continued to shape modern culture through symbols that outlived their makers by thousands of years. The region was never isolated, even in prehistory. Evidence shows waves of migration coming in from different directions. Austroasiatic-speaking peoples were among the earliest, leaving their linguistic footprint across much of mainland Southeast Asia. Later, Austronesian groups, famous for their seafaring ability, spread through islands and coastlines, bringing with them new skills and cultural practices. These early movements made Thailand a crossroads from the very beginning, a place where languages, traditions, and technologies combined. This blending did not stop in prehistory, but became a constant feature of the region's later history. Even with these findings, much of Thailand's earliest story remains shrouded in mystery. The people living here left no written records, so what we know is pieced together through archaeology and anthropology. Every pot unearthed, every burial site mapped, every fragment of bone analyzed helps us see how far back human presence goes and how sophisticated it had already become. Tools, farming, pottery, and rituals together built a foundation long before written chronicles or royal inscriptions appeared. What emerges from this early history is a clear picture. Thailand's story of adaptation and invention did not suddenly begin with kingdoms or dynasties. It had already started millennia earlier, when communities along rivers turned mud into rice fields, clay into pottery, and copper into bronze, setting the stage for centuries of culture that followed. Around the first few centuries of the Common Era, the lands that would later become Thailand were no longer shaped only by local traditions. Indian merchants, monks, and travelers arrived across coastal and river routes, carrying not just goods but also systems of belief and political organization. With them came the two great branches of Buddhism, Theravada, with its emphasis on monastic discipline, and Mahayana, which offered wider devotional paths. Alongside these faiths, Hindu deities and Brahmanical rituals also spread, transforming how early Thai societies understood kingship and the world around them. The blending of these influences shows that contact with India was not simply about trade in spices or textiles. It was about ideas that redefined how rulers presented themselves and how cities represented their power. The networks that transmitted these ideas were not abstract. They were tied to actual political powers in the region. To the east and south, the Funan Kingdom, based in what is now Cambodia and southern Vietnam, was one of the first great centers where Indian models of governance and religion were firmly rooted. Funan's cultural reach extended into the Chao Phraya Basin, shaping the way early communities there organized authority. When Funan declined, it was succeeded by Chenla, another Cambodian kingdom that maintained this connection to India's intellectual world. These neighboring powers asserted influence over emerging Thai polities, whether through direct control or through the prestige of adopting recognized cultural models. To be integrated into such a sphere meant access to trade networks that stretched far across the Indian Ocean, One of the most visible signs of this cultural transformation is the appearance of Sanskrit inscriptions on Thai soil. In fact, the oldest known Sanskrit inscription in Southeast Asia comes from Thailand itself, dating back to the 5th century CE. This is not just a linguistic curiosity. It proves that leaders within the region sought legitimacy through Indian concepts of power. Inscriptions recorded donations to temples, proclamations of kingship, and invocations of deities. With such records, we can see how rulers wanted their authority understood, not in local terms alone, but in connection to broader ideas of cosmic order and divine rule. New urban centers played a crucial part in this early adaptation. Sites such as Nakhon Pathom and U Thong emerged as thriving nodes where trade and cultural exchange were concentrated. Archaeologists uncovering these places find Buddhist stupas built in recognizably Indian styles, yet often combined with local traditions of craftsmanship. These cities became laboratories where imported ideas were reshaped to fit local society. The concept of the Devaraja, or God King, also took root during this period. This model, which linked a ruler to divine authority, originally flourished within Hindu Khmer traditions. Over time, it would serve as a foundation for Thai monarchs, whose legitimacy rested not just on military power, but on a cosmological relationship between king, state, and religion. The Indian epics also traveled alongside religious and political systems. Stories such as the Ramayana spread across Thailand, gradually being retold in distinctly Thai forms. Eventually, these tales crystallized into the Ramakien, which reimagined Indian mythic heroes and villains in local settings. What began as borrowed literature ended up woven into royal ceremonies and classical performance, where it survives today as part of court dances and theater. This long lifespan illustrates just how deeply early transmissions embedded themselves into cultural life. By the close of the 9th century, the adoption of Indian concepts of faith, monarchy, and writing had laid a deep foundation. Local rulers had tools to present themselves as legitimate kings, not just tribal leaders. Cities had become centers of ritual and trade, on par with others across Southeast Asia. The ideas that came with merchants and monks did not erase what was already here, but they created the ideological framework that would guide the rise of later kingdoms, such as Sukhothai and Ayutthaya. By the 6th century, the cultural landscape of central Thailand had formed into something new. This was the Dvaravati Period, remembered as the first distinctly Mon-Buddhist civilization in the region. Unlike future kingdoms with clear borders and singular rulers, Dvaravati did not operate as a centralized empire. Instead, it was a loose network of independent city-states, each maintaining its own leadership while sharing a common religious and artistic culture. Among the most prominent centers were Nakhon Pathom, Lopburi, and U Thong. Archaeological remains at these sites show urban planning, fortified settlements, and large religious monuments that confirm their role as powerful nodes of regional influence. The defining feature of Dvaravati's identity was Theravada Buddhism, which became firmly established during this era. Wooden monasteries and brick stupas were built to house relics and sacred images, many of which still survive in fragments today. The spread of Buddhism was not only about new places of worship, but also about the systematic use of Buddhist teachings and governance in society. Lay communities sponsored temples, rulers presented themselves as protectors of the faith, and monks traveled between settlements to spread doctrine. Dvaravati served as a spiritual bridge, taking ideas that originated in India and localizing them until they became inseparable from the region's own traditions. Art and architecture provide the clearest evidence of how this blending took shape. Sculptures of the Buddha from the period are often distinct, marked by soft facial features, flowing robes, and a calm expression said to reflect inner compassion. Carved Dharma chakras, or wheels of the law, were mounted on stone pedestals and placed prominently within city sites, symbolizing the central role of Buddhist law in guiding life. The stupas themselves revealed design choices that took inspiration from Indian prototypes, but their proportions and decorative elements speak to local creativity. Among the most striking features are early examples of the Phra Prong-style towers that would later influence Thailand's most iconic temples, including the famous Wat Arun in Bangkok centuries later. Dvaravati also laid some of the earliest linguistic and intellectual foundations in Thai history. The Mon language, spoken by the people of these city-states, was written down using scripts influenced by Indian writing systems. Alongside it appeared inscriptions in Pali, the language of Theravada Buddhist texts. These records, often carved into stone or metal, preserve donations to monasteries and descriptions of rituals, making Dvaravati one of the first literate societies of the region. This written tradition did more than just document events. It circulated key Buddhist concepts and linked Dvaravati's elites with the wider religious networks that stretched across South and Southeast Asia. At the same time, Dvaravati city-states occupied strategic positions along inland trade routes, making them valuable intermediaries in the flow of goods. Ideas and merchandise from India passed through Dvaravati on their way toward the Khmer regions and later toward communities of the Thai migrants arriving in the north. Archaeological finds of imported beads, ceramics, and religious icons confirm that Dvaravati was both a receiver and a distributor of wider cultural influences. Material culture shows clearly that this was not isolated development, but part of a dynamic network connecting land and sea across Asia. The decline of Dvaravati remains less precisely defined. Gradually, Khmer expansion pressed into central Thailand, establishing Angkor-linked control over key sites, while to the south, the Srivijaya Empire expanded its maritime reach. Yet even as political autonomy weakened, cultural features of Dvaravati endured. Buddhism continued to dominate the region, and artistic motifs carried forward into later kingdoms. Some of the city-states themselves never disappeared entirely, but instead shifted focus within larger regional polities. A mind-catching detail is that certain Dvaravati stupas incorporated architectural patterns that directly inspired later Thai sacred architecture, proving that innovation from this early period echoed for centuries. Numismatic evidence adds a final layer of intrigue. Coins minted under Dvaravati rulers bore symbols such as the Dharma chakra or other Buddhist imagery. These artifacts stand among the earliest examples of Buddhist coinage in Southeast Asia, turning religious philosophy into official currency. For a society so early in its formation, this merging of faith and economics revealed a sophisticated worldview. Devotion was not confined to the monastery, but stamped directly into the systems of daily exchange. In this sense, Dvaravati did not just promote Buddhism, it literally minted the Dharma into the lives of its people, leaving a legacy still visible in Thailand's cultural fabric today. By the 7th century, southern Thailand and the Malay Peninsula were drawn into the sphere of a powerful maritime force, the Srivijaya Empire. Based in Sumatra, Srivijaya was not a land empire ruled by vast armies. Its strength came from control of the seas. The kingdom dominated the Strait of Malacca, a narrow stretch of water that served as the main passage between the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea. Whoever held this strait commanded one of the most important trade arteries of the ancient world. Ports in southern Thailand became vital outposts in this economic network, linking local communities to distant shores thousands of miles away. Among these ports, Chaya and Nakhon Si Thammarat stand out as hubs that flourished under Srivijaya's protection. Situated along the Gulf of Thailand, these cities connected inland resources with maritime exchange. Archaeological evidence reveals structures built during this time, including Buddhist sanctuaries and monastery complexes that testify to a flourishing intellectual and spiritual life. Chaya in particular still preserves a remarkable stupa, whose design suggests links with both Indian architectural forms and local adaptations. The city was more than just a way station for trade. Many historians believe it served as one of the regional capitals of the Srivijaya Empire, a claim locals today still embrace with pride. Religion was central to this process of connection. Srivijaya became a prominent center of Mahayana Buddhism, attracting monks and scholars from across Asia. Chinese records mention that monks from the Tang Dynasty studied in Srivijaya-controlled lands before traveling onward to India for higher learning. This role as a religious gateway gave southern Thailand more than just commercial significance. It became part of a spiritual network that spanned multiple continents. Sanskrit inscriptions, Buddhist icons, and temple foundations from the region reveal the deep cultural mark left by this circulation of knowledge and practice. The cosmopolitan nature of Srivijaya's ports cannot be overstated. Archaeological finds from southern Thailand tell the story of contact with traders from across the globe. Indian merchants introduced textiles, pearls, and religious manuscripts. Chinese traders brought ceramics and silks in exchange for forest products and specialized goods that Southeast Asia produced in abundance. There is evidence of goods from the Middle East arriving as far as the Thai Peninsula, including Persian glassware, while Roman and Byzantine coins filtered in along these routes. The image that emerges is not of isolated coastal settlements, but of a marketplace where cultures and economies overlapped. Crucially, Srivijaya's reach over southern Thailand was not expressed through the direct imposition of centralized rule. While there may have been some political oversight, what mattered most was economic and cultural integration. By guarding shipping lanes and fostering stable trade, Srivijaya allowed port cities to thrive. In return, these cities embraced the empire's religious and cultural orientation. This form of indirect influence highlights the flexibility of Srivijaya's power. It mattered less whether armies marched inland, and more whether sailors, merchants, and monks recognized Srivijaya as the guarantor of the seas. This period marks the first time we see the peoples of Thailand actively participating in a global trading system. Earlier inland networks had linked communities to India and Cambodia, but under Srivijaya, the coastlines of Thailand became open gateways to the wider world. The trade patterns established here foreshadowed the later prominence of Thailand as a center of regional commerce. Centuries later, Ayutthaya and Bangkok would inherit this role, but the roots of maritime engagement trace back to the Srivijayan ports. Chinese sources leave us with a striking image. They noted that in Srivijaya-controlled regions of Thailand, markets overran with goods from every corner of Asia. Traders could find Persian vessels of cut glass as easily as Roman coins, mixed with Indian beads or Chinese porcelain. Few other locations illustrate so clearly how interconnected the medieval world had already become. That such a scene unfolded in peninsular Thailand shows the strategic and cultural weight of this corner of Southeast Asia. Even today, the surviving Chedi at Chaya is remembered not just as a religious monument, but also as a symbol of the time when southern Thailand stood as part of a maritime empire linking east and west. By the 9th century, the Khmer Empire, based at Angkor in present-day Cambodia, became the dominant political and cultural force in mainland Southeast Asia. Its influence extended deep into what is now northeastern and central Thailand. This expansion was not simply about armies occupying new lands. The Khmer established provincial centers that acted as administrative and religious hubs, ensuring their authority was tied both to governance and a sacred order. Regions such as Lopburi, once known as Lavapura, became important outposts of Khmer power, integrating Thai territory into a larger imperial system that stretched across much of the region. At Lopburi and other sites, provincial centers displayed clear signs of Khmer organization. Roads and reservoirs tied them into the vast infrastructure designed to bind the empire together. Inland trade routes connected directly back to Angkor, and religious monuments expressed the political authority of Khmer rulers in stone. In central Thailand, Phi Mai grew into one of the most remarkable Khmer outposts. It was not just a provincial town, it stood as a mirror of Angkor itself, complete with a monumental temple complex that remains one of the finest examples of Khmer architecture outside Cambodia. These sites confirm that Thai lands were not peripheral to Khmer ambitions, but integral parts of their administrative and religious network. Khmer culture brought with it a religious and cosmological worldview, deeply rooted in a combination of Hinduism and Buddhism. The concept of the Devaraja, or God King, stood at the center of Khmer statecraft. Rulers presented themselves as earthly embodiments of divine power, maintaining legitimacy by connecting the monarchy to a greater cosmic order. Inscriptions from this period, written in Sanskrit and Khmer, recorded acts of devotion, temple constructions, and royal decrees. For the first time in this region, rulers explicitly framed their power in terms of cosmic kingship, creating a legacy that would influence Thai monarchs for centuries to come. Architectural achievements reinforced this ideology. Temples such as Prasat Hin Phi Mai in Nakhon Ratchasima and Phanam Rung in Buriram Province were built with the grandeur of Angkor in mind. Dedicated to Hindu deities but later adapted for Buddhist use, they used massive sandstone blocks carved with intricate reliefs depicting mythological scenes. Their scale demonstrates the resources Khmer rulers were able to mobilize far from Angkor, while their design illustrates how sacred architecture was meant to replicate Mount Meru, the cosmic center of Hindu-Buddhist belief. These temple complexes established a model for monumental religious construction that future Thai kingdoms would continue, even developing their own unique versions. Infrastructure was another lasting contribution. The Khmer Empire constructed massive barrays, or reservoirs, within its heartland to sustain agriculture on a large scale. Similar systems appeared in Khmer-controlled areas of Thailand, enabling more intensive rice farming than local communities had previously achieved. With reservoirs and canals channeling water to fields, farmers could produce surpluses, which, in turn, supported larger populations and the growth of urban centers. Such systems reveal how Khmer influence extended beyond temples and into the practical organization of everyday life. This period saw the introduction of monumental stone building into central Thailand. Before Khmer expansion, local construction had depended more on wood and earth. The shift to stone, driven by imperial temple construction, revolutionized how societies in this region thought about permanence and sacred space. Structures from this time remain central sites of heritage today, while their techniques laid foundations for later Thai architectural achievements. Decline, however, came by the 13th century. Internal challenges began to weaken the Khmer Empire, while in the north and west, Thai-speaking groups were forming new political orders. The authority of Khmer outposts in Lopburi and Phi Mai diminished as local leaders aligned with rising powers. Yet even as direct rule ended, Khmer cultural and political models had already been woven into the social fabric of Thailand. The scale of Khmer ambition can still be seen in its infrastructure. The road from Angkor to Phi Mai stretched over 225 kilometers, equipped with stone rest houses and directional markers, evidence of a carefully organized system, not unlike a modern highway. At Phi Mai itself, the temple complex is aligned precisely toward Angkor Thom, proof of the interconnected religious and political vision that spanned national boundaries as we understand them today. These achievements highlight the extraordinary reach of the Khmer world and the depth of its influence on the lands that later became part of Thailand. Between the 10th and 13th centuries, a quiet but significant transformation began to reshape the population of the region. Groups known as the Tai Peoples started migrating gradually from southern China into the valleys and uplands of what is now northern and central Thailand. This migration was not a sudden invasion, but a slow and steady movement of communities looking for fertile land and more secure settlements. Over generations, these small groups settled into areas alongside existing Mon, Khmer, and other cultures, eventually becoming a dominant presence. By the time they established permanent states, the Thai had already positioned themselves as a majority ethnic and cultural force in parts of the region. One of the key reasons for their success lay in agriculture. Thai communities brought with them an advanced knowledge of wet rice cultivation, which required coordinated irrigation and systematic labor. Wet rice farming allowed higher yields than most previous farming methods, supporting dense populations that could form lasting communities. In contrast to the grand urban centers of the Khmer, Thai society revolved around smaller village-based networks, where cooperation within extended families and clans was essential. This style of organization favored stability in upland valleys and fertile plains, and provided the foundation on which larger political entities could eventually grow. Unlike the conquering powers of the Khmer, the Thai did not spread primarily through war or coercion. They integrated themselves within existing landscapes, adopting local customs, religions, and administrative practices, while continuing to speak their own language. This balance between adopting what was useful and preserving what defined their identity helped the Thai thrive in multicultural settings. Temples originally tied to Mon or Khmer religious authority were shared or reimagined within Thai communities, while Buddhist and Hindu practices blended with their own traditions of ancestor veneration. Over time, this approach created societies where old and new identities merged rather than clashed. Language became a crucial tool in this cultural adaptation. Early Thai dialects absorbed large amounts of Sanskrit and Pali vocabulary, particularly in the realms of religion, governance, and law. In some areas, the Thai began experimenting with written scripts inspired by Indian models, an important step toward the development of later Thai writing. As a spoken and eventually written language, Thai was practical enough to describe daily farming life, yet adaptable enough to carry sacred concepts and political ideologies borrowed from older civilizations. This evolution helped preserve Thai identity while linking it to larger cultural and religious systems already established in Southeast Asia. As populations expanded, Thai settlements became organized into units known as muang. Each muang functioned as a city-state with its own leader, armies, and surrounding villages. Yet none sought complete independence from the shared Thai cultural sphere. Kinship networks and shared traditions linked these muang into a broader cultural system, even when each local ruler pursued his own interests. This model differed sharply from the centralized control of the Khmer Empire, but it proved sustainable in mountainous terrain where smaller, flexible units could endure better than a single large state. The geography of upland northern Thailand, around present-day Chiang Rai and Chiang Mai, provided safe zones for Thai migrants. These areas were less exposed to Khmer domination, giving settlers the security to build agricultural bases and political nodes. From these strongholds, Thai populations gradually spread south into central valleys, widening their influence without provoking massive conflicts. The process was so gradual and widespread that when kingdoms started to appear, Thai culture was already deeply embedded in much of the land. Thai society also developed a distinctive form of local authority. At the village level, leadership centered on the Chow, or chief, who functioned like a minor king within his community. The authority of the Chow rested on kinship, control of land, and ritual power. In time, some families traced their lineage back to these local chiefs, claiming continuity across centuries. Even today, legends of descent from early Chow families remain part of local identity in northern Thailand. In these centuries of migration and settlement, no great empire was built, but the groundwork was laid for kingdoms yet to come. What emerged was a cultural landscape where neither conquest nor assimilation erased older identities. Instead, the Thai reshaped and combined them into the framework that would later define Thailand's political and cultural evolution. In 1238, a new political order rose in central Thailand that later generations would celebrate as the first true Thai kingdom, Sukhothai. Unlike the foreign-dominated systems before it, Sukhothai was remembered as a state created and ruled by Thai-speaking peoples themselves. Later Thai chronicles portrayed it as a golden age, characterized by peace, prosperity, and the emergence of a national identity, even if those accounts were written centuries after the kingdom's height. What remains clear is that Sukhothai introduced patterns that shaped Thai society and governance for centuries to come. One of its standout rulers was King Ramkam Heng. He is widely credited with developing the Thai script in the late 13th century, drawing on Khmer and Mon models while making an alphabet suited specifically to his people. The script he established became the backbone of written Thai, surviving with modifications into present-day usage. This innovation gave the kingdom the ability to record laws, religious texts, and royal inscriptions in its own language, rather than rely entirely on Sanskrit or Khmer. Beyond writing, Ramkhamhaeng Heng promoted a vision of kingship different from the divine monarchies that surrounded him. He styled himself as a father of the people, suggesting a ruler approachable to his subjects, rather than a distant god-king presiding over them. The religious landscape under Sukhothai also changed significantly. Theravada Buddhism became the official faith of the kingdom, reinforcing unity both within its borders and across tributary states. Monks and temples received royal patronage, and Buddhist teaching informed the moral legitimacy of rulers. The focus distinguished Sukhothai's identity from its Khmer neighbors, who maintained strong Hindu traditions beside Buddhism. Religion was not only a spiritual foundation, but also an administrative tool, binding scattered communities into a shared worldview that legitimized Sukhothai's authority. Foreign relations demonstrate how open the kingdom was to exchange. Records kept by Yuan China describe Sukhothai, referred to as Xi'an, as a land characterized by stability, wealth, and an eagerness to participate in trade diplomacy. Goods such as ceramics, forest products, and elephants moved out of the kingdom in return for textiles, luxury items, and recognition from China's imperial court. These connections positioned Sukhothai as an integrated part of Asia's wider commercial networks. Unlike many kingdoms that relied on rigid conquest, Sukhothai spread influence through trade, diplomacy, and a system of tribute. Visually, Sukhothai left a legacy through art and architecture that remains distinctive. Sculptors produced Buddha images characterized by elegant proportions, gentle facial expressions, and postures symbolizing both serenity and spiritual power. These differed from the heavier, more rigid images of earlier Khmer traditions. Architecture showcased lotus bud-shaped chetties and temple layouts that emphasized openness and harmony with their surroundings, rather than sheer monumentality. Together, these artistic choices reflected the spiritual ideals of Theravada Buddhism and the softer vision of rulership that set the kingdom apart. The mechanism by which Sukhothai exerted its authority followed the mandala model of Southeast Asia, where political control radiated from the center across a network of smaller semi-autonomous tributary states. Instead of occupying distant lands directly, Sukhothai secured loyalty through symbolic recognition of its king, religious patronage, and trade connections. This loose arrangement created a durable system for a time, but it lacked the centralized strength that might withstand stronger rivals over the long term. By the 15th century, the power of Sukhothai waned. The kingdom was gradually absorbed into the growing influence of Ayutthaya, which would soon dominate the region. Despite its decline, Sukhothai's cultural and political contributions remained foundational to Thai identity. Temples, inscriptions, and artistic conventions from this period continued to influence later dynasties and still shape Thailand's sense of history today. One extraordinary detail adds mystery to the story. The famous Ramkhamhaeng inscription of 1292, long considered Thailand's first historical document, may not actually date from his reign. Some scholars argue it was composed much later, raising questions about how the image of Sukhothai was purposefully shaped by later generations. Another curious feature of Sukhothai's history is its remarkable water management system, with ceramic pipes channeling water into artificial ponds. These early hydroengineering techniques remain of interest to modern Thai engineers. linking the ingenuity of the 13th century with practices studied in the present. In 1296, King Mongkut founded the city of Chiang Mai, establishing it as the capital of a new political entity, the Lan Na Kingdom. For centuries afterward, Lan Na became the dominant power in northern Thailand, separate from both Sukhothai and Ayutthaya. From the start, it carved out an identity of its own, with its own language, known as Khmer Muang, its own writing system, and a culture that reflected the distinctive mountain world it occupied. The name Lan Na itself means a million rice fields, a title that captured the agricultural wealth of its valleys and the importance of farming in sustaining its people. The geography of the kingdom shaped much of its history. Nestled in fertile basins surrounded by mountain ranges, Lan Na sat at a crossroads of trade routes linking China to the north, Burma to the west, and other Thai polities to the south and east. Its strategic location allowed it to function as a regional conduit, attracting merchants, religious devotees, and artisans. Though not as vast as lowland empires, Lan Na compensated with control of trade corridors that gave it both wealth and cultural diversity. This environment encouraged the development of a political order suited to mountainous terrain, balancing agricultural production with access to external goods and ideas. Religion played a central role in the kingdom's sense of purpose. Theravada Buddhism was deeply embedded in daily life and shaped how rulers presented themselves. Temples served as cultural anchors, not only places of worship, but also schools for copying manuscripts and preserving sacred texts. Monks played an influential role in both education and moral authority. Distinctive Lana stupas, with their rounded bases and tapering spires, marked the skyline of Chiang Mai and other city centers. These architectural forms became identifiers of the kingdom's devotion, as well as its artistic creativity. Lan Na's artistic contributions remain visible today. Craftsmen became known for wood carving, which adorned temples with detailed panels of mythological and floral designs. Goldwork and silverwork flourished, producing ritual objects and ornaments prized within and beyond the kingdom. Sculpture also stood out as a significant achievement, especially in the depiction of the Buddha. Statues from Lan Na combined graceful fluidity with robust forms, creating an aesthetic that influenced northern Thai art for centuries. These traditions became so ingrained that regional artisans continue to preserve these styles, maintaining continuity with their medieval past. Politically, Lan Na faced a turbulent path. At times, it aligned with neighbors, such as Sukhothai, recognizing the shifting balance of power in the region. At other times, it resisted encroachment, particularly from the expanding Burmese kingdoms. By the 16th century, however, Lan Na fell under repeated Burmese control, often reduced to the status of a vassal. Periods of occupation weakened its independence, though even under foreign dominance, its cultural practices remained vibrant. The longevity of its language, script, and religious customs demonstrates how resilience allowed identity to survive, despite political losses. The endurance of Lan Na's legacy is illustrated not only in art and architecture, but also in its myths and traditions. One of the most striking stories explains the foundation of Wat Phra Tat Doi Sutep, located on a mountain overlooking Chiang Mai. According to legend, a sacred relic was placed on the back of a white elephant, which climbed the mountain, trumpeted 3 times, and then died at that spot. This was taken as divine guidance, and a temple was built there. To this day, it remains one of Thailand's most revered religious sites. In 1350, King Rama I founded the Ayutthaya Kingdom along the Chao Phraya River. Its location was not accidental. The river offered fertile agricultural land while also connecting inland communities to the sea. From this base, Ayutthaya grew into the longest-lasting and most dominant Thai empire of the early period. For over 4 centuries, it controlled vast territories and served as the central hub of political, economic, and cultural life in the region. Ayutthaya became a cosmopolitan empire in a way that few other Southeast Asian states could match. Envoys from Persia, China, India, and Japan brought goods and knowledge to its court, while Europeans, including Portuguese, Dutch, and French visitors, established relations during the 16th and 17th centuries. The capital absorbed influences from these regions while maintaining a distinctly Thai identity. International traders found a city full of canals, bustling markets, and monumental temples. For Ayutthaya's rulers, managing this diverse environment required both flexibility and strength. The kingdom adopted a model of kingship much different from the paternal style associated with earlier Sukhothai. Ayutthaya's rulers embraced the concept of divine kingship, inspired by the Khmer Devaraja system, but blended with Theravada Buddhist ideology. The king was portrayed not as a fatherly guardian, but as a semi-divine figure whose moral and cosmic authority placed him far above ordinary subjects. This perception of kingship reinforced the centralization of power and allowed Ayutthaya's rulers to stand as unquestionable heads of the state. Administration supported this vision. The kingdom developed an organized bureaucracy, overseen by noble families bound to the palace by loyalty and rank. The Sakdina system allocated land and authority according to a scale of numerical rankings. Nobles, monks, soldiers, and even common farmers were assigned a fixed place in this hierarchy. This allowed centralized control while ensuring that resources from labor, land, and military service were efficiently distributed. Ayutthaya's bureaucracy became one of the most complex systems in Southeast Asia, a mechanism strong enough to hold the kingdom together across centuries of internal pressures and external threats. Ayutthaya's wealth and strength were visible in its architecture. At the height of its power, the capital city was one of the largest urban centers in the world, rivaling London and Paris by 1700. Its skyline included massive temple complexes, such as Wat Phra Sif Son Phet, where gilded stupas and towering prong structures dominated the landscape. These temples served both religious and political roles, symbolizing the combination of Buddhism with monarchical authority. Urban planning emphasized canals and causeways, making Ayutthaya both accessible and defensible, while earning it a reputation among European travelers as the Venice of the East. Military power underpinned its longevity. Armies deployed war elephants, which acted as living tanks in battle, trampling opposition and striking fear into rival states. Firearms acquired through foreign contacts added strength to traditional weapons, while the nobility provided organized leadership in warfare. With these tools, Ayutthaya subdued neighboring polities, incorporating the remains of Sukhothai, encroaching into Lan Na, and finally absorbing Khmer-controlled areas. Expansion and consolidation allowed Ayutthaya to hold authority over an extensive and diverse population. Culture flourished within this environment. Literature reached new levels of sophistication, with works such as Lilit Phra Lo, blending poetry with romance and morality tales. Performing arts, court dance, and music thrived under royal patronage, projecting the refinement of the court to both domestic audiences and foreign envoys. Sculpture, particularly religious art, continued traditions from earlier kingdoms while developing forms that came to define Thai aesthetics for centuries. In this cultural flowering, Ayutthaya created a legacy that endured far beyond its fall. At its peak, Ayutthaya's population exceeded 1 million residents. Traders and diplomats who visited spoke of its scale and grandeur. French King Louis XIV even received ambassadors from Ayutthaya, whose presence in Paris caused a wave of fascination at Versailles. Their exotic attire and presentation influenced French fashion trends, popularizing silk and embroidered designs drawn from Siamese models. Such stories underline how deeply Ayutthaya impressed even distant audiences. By the mid-18th century, Ayutthaya remained a dominant Southeast Asian power. Its capital was still one of the largest in the world, filled with monumental temples, trade networks that reached Europe and Asia, and a royal court that commanded attention abroad. Yet beneath this outward strength, instability was setting in. Succession disputes weakened the grip of its monarchs. Regional governors began exercising more autonomy, and the kingdom was stretched thin from overextension. To the west, a growing Burmese state under the Konbaung dynasty was becoming increasingly aggressive. The stage was set for conflict that would test Ayutthaya's resilience like never before. The Burmese-Siamese War of 1765 to 1767 was not the first confrontation between the two nations, but it proved to be the most devastating. King Sinbushin of Burma launched a major invasion with the goal of permanently crippling Siamese power. Burmese forces pressed deep into territory, moving on both northern and southern fronts, cutting Ayutthaya off from reinforcements and supplies. The capital found itself surrounded by an organized Burmese military that was determined to finish what earlier invasions had only started. For 14 months, Ayutthaya endured a prolonged siege. Supplies dwindled, disease spread inside city walls. The once mighty metropolis, with its temples, palaces, and markets, transformed into a desperate fortress. Burmese soldiers built blockades, destroyed outer defenses, and waited for starvation and exhaustion to do their work. Thai resistance was fierce, but morale eroded as the siege dragged on. In April of 1767, the Burmese finally stormed the capital, bringing centuries of glory to a sudden and catastrophic end. The fall of the city was absolute. Ayutthaya was burned to the ground, its temples devastated by fire, its elaborate palaces looted, and its libraries reduced to ashes. Priceless manuscripts containing records of political history, religious teachings, and literary works were lost forever in the flames. The artistic achievements and chronicles that had defined the kingdom's cultural life vanished in a matter of days. The psychological impact of this destruction struck harder than the military defeat. A civilization that had dominated Southeast Asia for more than 400 years seemed to collapse in a single moment. When Ayutthaya fell, the central administration of the kingdom fell with it. Without a functioning palace or monarch to command loyalty, Siam fragmented into smaller regions. Surviving nobles, soldiers, and common people scattered into the countryside, taking refuge wherever they could. Local warlords and governors established temporary rule in different provinces, but none could claim the legitimacy that Ayutthaya's kings had once exercised. The vacuum of authority left Siam in a state of chaos with no immediate path toward recovery. Out of this collapse, one figure emerged who would soon reshape Siam's fortunes. A military leader named Thaksin began gathering support to the south, in Thonburi, across the river from future Bangkok. With determination and skill, he started rebuilding an army from scattered survivors, laying the groundwork for national recovery. Thaksin's rise marked the transition from Ayutthaya's destruction toward a new chapter in Thai history. When Ayutthaya fell to the Burmese in 1767, Siam appeared broken beyond repair. The capital lay in ruins, the royal court had collapsed, and across the countryside, small warlords began carving out territories for themselves. Into this chaos stepped a military commander named Thaksin, a man of mixed Chinese and Thai heritage, who proved to be one of the most remarkable figures in Thai history. With only a small force at his side, he retreated toward the east, gathered survivors and soldiers, and began a campaign of rapid reconquest. Within the same year that Ayutthaya was destroyed, he had created a new capital across the Chao Phraya River at Thonburi, a place chosen for practical reasons more than grandeur. What mattered to him most was speed and security. Thonburi lacked the ornate palaces, temples, and symbolic landscapes that had defined Ayutthaya, but it held strategic value. Situated along the river, it was defensible and supplied enough trade access to sustain his growing army. From this base, Thaksin coordinated an extraordinary series of campaigns. He rallied men still traumatized from the fall of their kingdom, used the river for fast movement of troops, and outmaneuvered both the Burmese armies and the competing Siamese warlords. In only a few years, centralized unity returned under his authority. Thaksin's success was not only military. He cultivated legitimacy through Buddhism, publicly presenting himself as a patron of the faith. He funded temples, welcomed monks, and encouraged the rebuilding of sacred structures destroyed in the war. Yet his relationship with religion became more complex over time. Known for intense meditation practices, he claimed mystical experiences and later began to suggest a kind of divine role for himself, bridging the line between king and spiritual figure. This alarmed many within the monkhood, who saw such assertions as dangerous and out of line with Orthodox Buddhism. Despite that tension, he remained a relentless warrior king. Campaign after campaign extended Siam's reach once more. He marched north to Lan Na, securing Chiang Mai and reinforcing Thai influence there. He sent expeditions into the Lao regions, projecting control over Vientiane and Luang Prabang. He did not stop at reclaiming old borders. He also moved down the Malay Peninsula, bringing tributary states back under Siamese sway. Each victory restored both confidence and prestige, signaling to neighbors that Siam had survived its disaster and remained a regional power. But with expansion came strain. Rebuilding after decades of war required more than conquest. Resources stretched thin, and heavy demands on labor and rice collection created discontent. Rebellions began flaring in parts of the kingdom he had only recently consolidated. By the late 1770s, mutinies and plots against him surfaced, weakening his image. His increasingly mystical claims of divine authority did not unite the elite, but divided them. Isolation grew around him, and the fragile balance he had created started to break apart. In 1782, his reign came to an end. His own trusted general, Chao Phraya Chakri, returned from a campaign in Cambodia to seize power. Taksin was removed, and Chakri established himself as King Rama I, founding the Chakri dynasty that continues in Thailand today. Although Thonburi ceased to be the capital, replaced by Bangkok across the river, its brief role had been decisive. It served as the critical bridge between destruction and renewal, proving that even after a catastrophic fall, Siam could reorganize. In 1782, a powerful general named Chow Phraya Chakri returned from campaigning in Cambodia to find instability spreading through Siam. King Taksin had alienated large parts of the elite. Rebellions were gathering momentum, and the fragile unity that had been restored after the destruction of Ayutthaya was faltering again. Recognizing both the danger and the opportunity, Chakri moved decisively. He deposed Taksin, assumed the throne, and took the royal name Rama I. With that act, he founded the Chakri dynasty, and remarkably, the line he started still reigns over Thailand today, more than 2 centuries later. His first priority was not simply seizing power, but giving the kingdom a proper foundation from which survival and growth were possible. Rather than remain in Thonburi, which had always been seen as a temporary solution, Rama I looked across the Chao Phraya River to Rattanakosin Island. Here, he set about creating a new capital designed to echo the grandeur of Ayutthaya, while avoiding its vulnerabilities. Construction projects began immediately. The Grand Palace was built to serve as both a royal residence and symbolic center of rule. Within its walls, Wat Phra Kawu was constructed as the kingdom's most sacred temple, housing the Emerald Buddha, which he carefully relocated from its earlier home. In doing this, Rama I not only secured a capital, he gave Siam a renewed cultural heart that linked the present with the memory of its former glory. Restoring stability involved more than physical infrastructure. After decades marked by foreign invasion and civil disorder, government systems required rebuilding. Rama I reorganized the administration, strengthened the roles of provincial officials, and reasserted the authority of the central monarchy. Buddhism was actively supported to reinforce both moral order and legitimacy. Monks received patronage, temples were repaired, and religious learning was revived. These moves helped re-establish a sense of national identity at a time when memories of Ayutthaya's fall still hung heavy. Cultural revival was also a key part of his project. Rama I ordered a careful review and revision of the kingdom's legal code, standardizing laws so that local variations would no longer undermine authority. He supported a grand effort to preserve Buddhist texts, having scholars collect and compile copies to replace those lost in the burning of Ayutthaya. Literature and performing arts also gained new momentum. One of his most famous contributions was overseeing the recreation of the Ramakien, a Thai adaptation of the Indian Ramayana epic. More than a work of entertainment, it served as a foundation of Thai literature, painting, and dance, celebrated in murals and performances that continue today. This revival also came with a redefined model of kingship. The more paternal style of rule associated with Sukhothai had long since faded, but Rama I carefully balanced notions of divine kingship drawn under Khmer traditions with a stronger bureaucratic framework. Provincial rulers were kept under closer watch, with tighter links to the central administration. This balance of sacred authority and state organization gave the new dynasty the tools it needed to endure. Challenges remained, especially from Burma. Only a few years into his reign, the kingdom faced a massive Burmese attempt to invade, remembered as the Nine Armies War of 1785 to 1786. True to its name, the invasion involved multiple coordinated Burmese forces pressing into Siamese territory from different directions. Rama I coordinated defenses and, with support from his brother and trusted generals, managed to repel the threat. This victory reinforced Siam's survival and confirmed that the new dynasty had both legitimacy and strength. Diplomatic strategy was equally important. While consolidating positions at home, Rama I maintained careful relations with Vietnam and paid tribute to China, ensuring peace with two powerful neighbors. Such alliances allowed Siam time to rebuild without facing overwhelming outside pressure. Bangkok, the city he founded, would grow into one of Asia's great capitals. Its official ceremonial name, written in Thai and composed by Rama I himself, is astonishingly long with over 160 characters, holding the title of the world's longest place name. More simply, it is called Krung Thep by locals. Within its grand palace complex, the Emerald Buddha remains the most sacred religious object in the kingdom, and in a tradition begun under Rama I, only the king himself or his highest representative may change its seasonal robes 3 times each year. This continuity links the present Thai monarchy directly with the vision first set out in 1782, when Rama I transformed a fragile state into the foundations of a modern nation. The early Rattanakosin Era opened with Bangkok as the center of a kingdom trying to rebuild itself. After the disaster of Ayutthaya's fall and the brief interlude of Thonburi, the first 4 kings of the Chakri dynasty had to restore not only stability but also legitimacy. This task meant enforcing order, protecting borders, and re-establishing the cultural and religious institutions that had made Siam a coherent state in the first place. From Rama I to Rama IV, the dynasty worked step by step to consolidate power and lay out the foundations of identity that the country still values today. The most urgent problem was the defense of Siam's borders. Burma remained the greatest immediate threat, and throughout the reigns of Rama I and Rama II, multiple campaigns were fought to prevent invasion. Siamese forces also moved outward against Laos and Cambodia, bringing vassal states under tighter supervision, while in the south, parts of the Malay Peninsula were made to send tribute. These military efforts were about survival, but they also confirmed Siam's return as a regional power, only a few decades removed from complete collapse. Success on the battlefield reinforced the authority of the new dynasty at home. At the same time, Siam navigated a careful balancing act with other neighbors. Vietnam was pressing westward, competing with Siam for influence in Cambodia and Laos. Confrontation was frequent, and each side tried to secure loyalty from local rulers. Meanwhile, King China remained in unavoidable power. The Chakri kings continued Ayutthaya's tradition of sending tribute missions to the Chinese Empire, both to legitimize their reign and to ensure trade access. Unlike many regions of Southeast Asia, which by the early 1800s were falling into direct European colonial control, Siam's position was kept stable through diplomacy. The dynasty recognized that survival depended on cautious foreign relations, which bought them valuable time. Stability at home allowed cultural life to flourish once more. Rama I's court sponsored mural painting and the retelling of epic literature, rooting the new capital in strong symbols of Thai identity. Under Rama II, court drama and poetry grew in sophistication. Poets became prominent figures, and dramatic performances, sponsored by the palace, gave the era a distinctive artistic prestige. These forms of expression connected the people to a sense of continuity despite the upheaval of recent generations. Rama III, who reigned from 1824 to 1851, further encouraged temple building and urban development. Many of the temples that dominate central Bangkok today trace significant restoration back to his rule. Wat Pho, in particular, was renovated as both a religious site and a place of learning. Without printing technology, Thai monks carved Buddhist texts onto more than 1,400 marble slabs placed around the temple's courtyards, effectively creating the first permanent public library in the world. This effort preserved vast amounts of religious and philosophical knowledge for future generations, showing how intellectual life adapted in the absence of paper-based mass reproduction. Daily life in Bangkok reflected the growth of the new capital. The city expanded along its canals, which were dug both for transport and for defense. So central were these waterways that Western visitors began calling Bangkok the Venice of the East. Up until the mid-19th century, most ordinary travel was done by boat, with homes and markets clustering tightly along the canals. The image of the city as a floating community endured, even as later kings introduced roads and new infrastructure. Although Western powers like the British and Americans began appearing at Siam's ports during this period, contact remained limited. The dynasty preferred to keep trade and diplomacy cautious, wary of the fates of neighboring states that were increasingly falling under colonial control. This cautious stance delayed major confrontation, but foreshadowed the reforms that would arrive with King Mongkut later in the 19th century. What the early Chakri kings managed in these years was vital. They rebuilt order after loss, preserved cultural and religious continuity, and gave Siam enough strength to negotiate the coming century on its own terms. King Mongkut, who reigned from 1851 to 1868 as Rama IV, is remembered as one of Siam's most scholarly and forward-looking monarchs. Before ascending the throne, he lived as a Buddhist monk for 27 years, immersing himself in religious learning, meditation, and linguistic study. This long period outside the royal court shaped his personality and outlook. Unlike his warrior predecessors, Mongkut approached leadership with the tools of a contemplative intellectual. He believed deeply in the value of knowledge, whether drawn from Buddhist scripture or from the modern sciences spreading across the world. His reign marked the beginning of a decisive shift in Siam's strategy for survival: modernization, diplomacy, and selective engagement with the West. The Southeast Asia of his era was under pressure from colonial expansion. The British had absorbed Burma into their empire, and the French were beginning to press into Vietnam and Cambodia. Mongkut recognized that Siam could not withstand these powers through military strength alone. Instead of resisting all foreign contact, he sought ways to show Western governments that Siam was a stable and civilized nation, worth dealing with as a partner rather than a conquest. His solution was to accept certain forms of Western influence and use them diplomatically to strengthen the kingdom's standing. One of his most important acts was opening Siam to foreign trade through treaties. The most famous was the Bow-Ring Treaty of 1855 with Britain. This agreement reduced royal control over commerce and granted significant privileges to British traders, including lower tariffs and extraterritorial rights. While the treaty limited some of Siam's sovereignty over economic affairs, it served a greater goal: preventing outright colonization. By demonstrating willingness to cooperate with Western demands for freer trade, Mongkut bought the kingdom security at a time when neighboring countries were losing independence to colonial powers. He balanced these political and economic strategies with cultural and intellectual reform. Mongkut was an avid student of Western science, particularly astronomy and mathematics. He also applied these new methods within the monkhood, encouraging forms of what came to be seen as rationalist Buddhism that resisted superstition and emphasized clear interpretation of scripture. This reform was subtle but important. It allowed Buddhism to adapt to a changing world while preserving its central role in Siamese identity. He reorganized the Buddhist order, promoted discipline among monks, and built a reputation for combining traditional faith with modern reasoning. Missionaries were active in Siam during his reign, and although Mongkut resisted mass conversion or heavy foreign interference, he allowed Christian schools and hospitals to operate. He recognized that Western-style education and medicine could benefit the kingdom, even if Christianity itself did not replace Buddhism. In a famous example, he employed a British Indian woman named Anna Leonowens as a teacher for his household. Her experiences later inspired the fictionalized story of The King and I, though the actual relationship was far more formal and practical, aimed at exposing his heirs to foreign languages and knowledge. Mongkut's engagement with Western science reached a dramatic peak in 1868, when he used his own astronomical calculations to predict a solar eclipse visible in Siam. He invited European scientists to witness the event, and his prediction proved exact, winning him admiration among Western observers. Yet the same trip led to tragedy. While observing the eclipse in the jungle, Mongkut contracted malaria. He fell ill soon afterward and died at the age of 64, leaving the throne to his son, Chulalongkorn. European commentators remembered him not only as a king, but also as an extraordinary astronomer. Though the reforms of his reign were modest compared with what followed, Mongkut shifted the kingdom's outlook. He showed that survival in the age of empire required more than battlefield victories. It demanded knowledge, calculated diplomacy, and the willingness to adapt without abandoning core traditions. He even signed some of his correspondence as Rama IV, King of Siam, astronomer, a title that captured his dual identity as ruler and scholar. In that balance of monarch and scientist lay the beginnings of Siam's strategy for modern independence. King Chulalongkorn, Rama V, who reigned from 1868 to 1910, is remembered as one of Thailand's most transformative monarchs. His legacy is tied to the survival of Siam as the only Southeast Asian nation to avoid colonization. He came to the throne as a young man, raised under the influence of his father, King Mongkut, who exposed him to foreign teachers, Western languages, and the idea that knowledge from abroad might be used without abandoning national traditions. This early preparation gave him the tools to guide his kingdom into a world dominated by European empires. One of Chulalongkorn's most significant achievements was his overhaul of government. Rather than relying on the centuries-old system of sakdina, which tied a person's land, status, and obligations to a complicated ranking system, he created a more centralized administration. New ministries handled specific tasks, from foreign affairs to justice, finance, and defense. He strengthened the role of a civil service, in which positions were filled on the basis of ability as much as social background. The king drew on advisors from both Thailand and abroad to build this structure, and his reforms reshaped the kingdom into a more modern state, less dependent on hereditary elites. His economic policies mirrored this structural change. Chulalongkorn introduced land registration systems, an innovation that both streamlined taxation and gave the central state a clearer grasp on resources. He reformed tax collection, reducing the reliance on farming out collection to private individuals, a practice that often bred corruption. Under his reign, telegraph lines were installed, and modern banking institutions began operation. Equally important was the building of state railways, which reshaped the geography of the kingdom by linking Bangkok with key provincial centers. These projects not only facilitated trade and administration, but also signaled to Western governments that Siam was developing the kind of infrastructure associated with modern nations. Social change was also a hallmark of his reign, and perhaps the most famous of his reforms was the gradual abolition of slavery. In Siam, many people had entered slavery through debt or captivity, and it had been a long-standing institution. Chulalongkorn pursued a step-by-step process, beginning by prohibiting the sale of children into bondage and gradually releasing groups of slaves over time. By the early 20th century, slavery had effectively disappeared. That transformation stood out in Southeast Asia, where bondage and corvée labor remained common in neighboring territories under both local kings and colonial regimes. Chulalongkorn also maneuvered with remarkable skill on the diplomatic stage. He visited Europe twice, in 1897 and again in 1907, meeting monarchs, inspecting industries, and showing Western audiences a powerful ruler who was their equal. These tours strengthened Siam's position as a sovereign state. When pressures came from Britain and France, he sometimes ceded smaller border territories, such as parts of Laos and Cambodia, judging that concessions of peripheral lands were a worthwhile price for keeping Siam's central heartland intact. This policy preserved the independence of the country at a moment when colonial encirclement seemed almost inevitable. Legal reform supported his diplomatic strategy. With the help of foreign advisors, Siam established a legal system that resembled Western codes. This move eliminated one of the common colonial pretexts, the claim that Asian kingdoms lacked proper courts. By modernizing justice administration, Chulalongkorn assured Western partners that their citizens would be treated under fair laws, removing the justification for extraterritorial privileges. This legal reorganization was both practical and symbolic, showing that Siam could stand as equal to Europe in matters of governance. The combined effect of these reforms was historic. At a time when every other kingdom in the region fell under European rule, Siam maintained sovereignty by presenting itself as modern yet unmistakably Thai. This achievement is reflected in how Chulalongkorn is remembered today. His death anniversary on October 23rd is still a national holiday. Across Thailand, statues of the king attract offerings of red roses from those who see him as a protector, a cultural hero, and the father of modern Thailand. When King Chulalongkorn passed away in 1910, his son Vajiravud ascended the throne as Rama VI. Unlike his father, whose main concern had been warding off colonial domination through reforms, Vajiravud ruled a kingdom that had already secured its independence. His priority became shaping a stronger sense of national unity, because Siam at the time was still a patchwork of diverse peoples and regional traditions. Vajiravud believed modernization needed not only functioning institutions, but also shared identity, something that would hold the kingdom together in an age when nationalism was spreading across the globe. He turned to education, symbols, and culture to achieve this. During his reign, Western-style compulsory schooling was formally introduced, making literacy a growing expectation rather than a privilege limited to monks or elites. At the same time, the founding of Chulalongkorn University in Bangkok created a national center of higher learning. The students who attended represented a new generation, literate, professional, and increasingly conscious of the idea of being Thai. Schools promoted civic duty, loyalty to the monarch, and pride in the nation. Through these measures, Vajirabhut made education both a practical tool and a way of shaping identity. National symbols also took form during his years on the throne. In 1917, he introduced the tricolor flag with red, white, and blue stripes, still used today. The colors were meant to represent the nation, religion, and monarchy, the three pillars of Thai statehood. Along with this flag came the strengthening of a modern military based on Western organization and discipline. Soldiers were trained not just as defenders, but also as citizens representing the values of a unified state. Nationalism did not erase Siam's long-standing traditions, but added a new layer of shared identity across local and regional divisions. The influence of Europe was plain to see. English spread quickly in schools and among educated classes. Literature, plays, and journalism showed strong Western influence, and political ideas such as constitutionalism began circulating in educated circles. Vajirabhut himself, educated as a young man in Britain, wrote many works that blended Western forms of writing with Thai themes. Plays and translations from Shakespeare shared space with Thai language essays, all with the goal of shaping a new public culture. Siam was adapting the tools of the West, but putting them to service and building a distinctly Thai consciousness. This new national identity was tested during World War I. In 1917, Siam joined the Allies and sent medical teams and pilots to Europe. Its military contribution was small compared to larger nations, but the symbolism was powerful. By standing with the victors, Siam earned a seat at the negotiations after the war. At Versailles, Siam stood alongside Japan as the only independent Asian nations recognized on equal terms, and the event marked a high point in Siam's international status. The experience also reinforced the monarchy's claim that the kingdom's modernization had earned global respect. By the late 1920s, however, growing social changes were reshaping Siam. A class of Western-educated bureaucrats and professionals had emerged. They worked in the modern ministries, taught in the new universities, and saw themselves as part of a society capable of more than obedience to the throne. European ideas of constitutional government and parliamentary rule spread through this group, and many began to question the continuation of absolute monarchy. When Vajirabhut died in 1925, his brother Prajadipok succeeded him as Rama VII. His reign quickly faced challenges. The worldwide Great Depression undermined Siam's economy, cutting into revenues and exposing weaknesses in the central government. At the same time, demands from the new middle class for reform grew louder. Unlike his predecessors, Prajadipok had fewer resources to rely on and found it increasingly difficult to balance tradition with modern pressures. Change was no longer avoidable. In daily life, Bangkok itself reflected global currents. The 1920s saw silent film theaters appear across the city, jazz orchestras playing in night venues, and students imitating Western dress. Young elites walked between wooden houses along canals wearing Oxford shoes or bowler hats, moving easily between local customs and imported fashions. This cultural mixing illustrated the dual nature of Siam at the time. deeply rooted in ancient traditions, but eager to participate in the modern world that its kings had worked for a century to adapt to. By the early 1930s, the foundations laid by past kings were under pressure from a society that had changed more quickly than the monarchy itself. A generation of bureaucrats, civil servants, and young military officers had been educated in Western-style schools. Many had studied abroad, returning with new ideas about governance, national identity, and the role of ordinary citizens in shaping political life. Yet the state still rested on an absolute monarchy, where royal decision-making outweighed institutions. For these emerging elites, the gap between their political vision and the reality of Siam's system grew harder to ignore. Dissatisfaction also reflected the global environment. The Great Depression had reached Siam, cutting into rice exports and state revenue. Budgets shrank, jobs disappeared, and frustration spread. At court, King Prajadipok, Rama VII, was seen by some as cautious and indecisive. He showed willingness to consider constitutional reform, but delays and limited proposals gave little confidence to reformist circles. Out of this frustration grew the Khmer Ratsadon, or People's Party. The group was small, composed of a few dozen men from civilian and military backgrounds, but they were determined. They communicated quietly and developed a plan to bring political change with minimal violence. Their vision was to end absolute rule and replace it with a constitutional monarchy, ensuring that power came from institutions and not only from tradition. They understood the risks. In regional terms, no Asian kingdom had ever moved peacefully to a parliamentary system. Their expectations were not of instant democracy, but of irreversible political change. On June 24, 1932, the plan became reality. While the king was away from the center of power, members of the People's Party coordinated a swift takeover of government buildings in Bangkok. Key army units were convinced or coerced to stand down. The organizers presented their manifesto, declaring the abolition of absolute monarchy and the creation of a new constitutional order. The suddenness of the move caught the royal establishment by surprise. Troops loyal to the king did not mobilize against the coup leaders, and rivals among the bureaucracy hesitated to resist. By taking the capital before opposition could form, the People's Party maximized the chance that change would hold. King Prajadipok faced a choice: resist, risking civil war, or agree. He decided to accept their demands, stating later that he had long recognized reforms might be necessary, but had hoped they would come in due course. By accepting without bloodshed, he gained some credit as a monarch unwilling to sacrifice lives for personal power. The outcome was the first peaceful transition from absolute monarchy to constitutional monarchy in Asia, beginning a new era in Siam. The first constitution outlined the creation of an elected assembly, though in practice, politics remained dominated by men from the military and bureaucracy. Elections were limited, and political parties scarcely existed. Nevertheless, the break with centuries of tradition was profound. Titles and court ceremonies were scaled back. Authority in theory now resided with the people, though in reality it was exercised by a narrow elite shaped by Western ideas of governance. Tensions began immediately. Questions about the role of the monarchy, the strength of parliament, and the influence of the army shaped every debate. Military factions and civilian reformists both sought to guide the new system, often coming into conflict. Coups and countermoves would soon follow, setting a pattern of fragile constitutionalism. Siam's path in 1932 predated Japan's post-war reforms by more than a decade. For a kingdom once defined by divine kingship, the shift was extraordinary. For years afterward, June 24th was celebrated as the country's national day. Later regimes quietly removed the observance, reshaping political memory, yet the date still carries meaning. Today, many Thais are only rediscovering its importance, seeing in the events of 1932 the roots of their nation's ongoing debate over power, tradition, and democracy. In 1939, Siam officially changed its name to Thailand under the leadership of Field Marshal Plaek Phibun Songkhram, a military officer who had risen to power through his nationalist agenda. Phibun presented himself as a modernizer, determined to turn Thailand into a strong, unified nation-state. He imposed a wave of ultra-nationalist policies meant to build loyalty not just to the monarchy or the military, but to a broader sense of new Thai identity. The name change was part of this strategy, linking the state directly to the Tai people rather than to older dynastic traditions. At the same time, he admired the fascist regimes of Europe, particularly Mussolini's Italy, and believed that similar authoritarian modernization could strengthen Thailand. Phibun encouraged Western-style clothing, prohibited traditional dress in public spaces, and issued cultural decrees aimed at reshaping everyday life. His government broadcast propaganda insisted on the slogan "Thailand for the Thai," positioning the nation's destiny in terms of race and unity. When World War II began in Europe, Thailand initially declared its neutrality. This position, however, was challenged by geography and circumstance. In December 1941, Japanese forces invaded Southeast Asia, moving against British Malaya and Burma. To reach their targets quickly, Japanese troops demanded passage through Thai territory. After brief fighting, Phibun allowed them to cross, sparing Thailand from a full-scale conquest. Within weeks, Thailand signed a military alliance with Japan, formally joining the Axis powers. For Phibun's government, the alignment with Japan promised territorial rewards. With Japan's backing, Thailand recovered areas in Laos and Cambodia that had been ceded to French Indochina in earlier disputes. These gains, however, rested entirely on Japan's fortunes and could not last. Underneath official cooperation, resistance took shape. The Free Thai movement, known locally as Sari Thai, organized networks of opposition to Japan. Thai students and exiles abroad coordinated with allied governments, while secret operatives worked inside Thailand itself. The movement maintained contact with the United States and Britain, passing intelligence and preparing for the eventual defeat of Japan. This covert contribution later proved decisive in protecting Thailand's sovereignty. By 1944, with Japan losing ground in the Pacific, support for Phibun weakened. He was pressured out of office, though Thailand remained formally allied with Japan until its surrender in 1945. At war's end, Thailand faced a precarious diplomatic situation. As an Axis partner, the country risked occupation or punitive measures. Yet the Allies, particularly the United States, recognized the significance of the Free Thai movement's efforts. On this basis, Thailand avoided the harsh treatment given to other Axis-aligned states. No foreign occupation followed, and no war crimes tribunals targeted Thai leaders. Instead, Thailand was restored to the international community relatively quickly, though it was required to return the territories acquired under Japanese sponsorship. The late 1940s were marked by turbulence. Civilian governments struggled to establish authority, while the military remained deeply embedded in politics. Coups and counter-coups defined the decade, and assassinations of political figures shook confidence. Against this instability, the monarchy began quietly regaining significance. Since the 1932 revolution, royal influence had been curtailed, but events pushed the crown back into public life. In 1946, King Ananda Mahidol, Rama VIII, died unexpectedly and under mysterious circumstances in the Grand Palace. His younger brother, Bhumibol Adulyadej, assumed the throne as Rama IX. His reign would become the longest in Thai history, but in these early years it symbolized a return of the monarchy as a stabilizing force in uncertain times. Thailand's wartime experience was singular. It was one of the few nations aligned with the Axis that escaped Allied occupation and punishment. The hidden operations of the Free Thai ensured its place on the winning side of history, even while its government had collaborated with Japan. At the same time, life under occupation saw cultural adaptations of its own. Jazz and swing music, though discouraged by Japanese authorities, survived in underground venues. Thai musicians adapted American styles and sometimes slipped coded resistance messages into their lyrics. For ordinary people, these performances expressed both defiance and hope in years of uncertainty. As the Cold War reshaped Asia in the 1950s, Thailand became a central ally for the United States. American policymakers viewed the kingdom as a critical partner in containing communism in Southeast Asia. To solidify this partnership, Thailand joined the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, or SEATO, in 1954, aligning itself formally with the United States and other anti-communist states. This organization presented itself as a collective defense pact meant to act as a counterpart to NATO, though in practice it relied heavily on American support. Under this arrangement, Thailand offered military facilities for U.S. forces. By the 1960s, as the Vietnam War escalated, the country hosted numerous American air bases that became major launching points for bombing campaigns across Indochina. The scale of this presence was vast. At its peak, over 40,000 American personnel were stationed in Thailand, the largest concentration of U.S. troops in Asia outside Japan. This heavy involvement with the United States reinforced the dominance of Thailand's military rulers. During the late 1950s, Field Marshal Sarit Thanarat took power, establishing an authoritarian regime with strong American backing. Sarit promoted economic growth and modernization, while ruling with tight restrictions on political freedom. He justified military control as necessary for stability in the face of communist threats. When Sarit died in 1963, his successor, Tanom Kitakachorn, continued the same model of leadership, with the army at the center of political power. Supported by U.S. money and arms, these regimes suppressed opposition, censored the press, and expanded internal security forces. Any hint of leftist activity was treated as a danger to national security. American aid and investment transformed the economy. Billions of dollars poured into Thailand through both direct assistance and private enterprise linked to the U.S. military presence. Bangkok grew rapidly, shifting from a traditional canal city into a modern urban hub with new infrastructure, hotels, and booming service industries. Poorer regions, especially the Northeast, lagged behind, and this created a visible gap between rural life and urban prosperity. While the capital saw rapid modernization, vast numbers of farmers remained tied to low-paying agricultural work. The inequality planted the seeds of future unrest, as rural communities began to feel excluded from new prosperity. At the same time, the rise of modern universities nurtured a new force in Thai society: educated young people critical of military rule. Exposure to new ideas, both from Western democratic traditions and from dissatisfaction with corruption at home, inspired student groups to call for a political voice. The late 1960s and early 1970s saw growing demonstrations, print publications, and underground discussions around democracy, justice, and civil rights. For the younger generation, military governments no longer looked like protectors, but obstacles preventing the country from realizing its potential. The turning point came on October 14, 1973. Tens of thousands of students, joined by ordinary citizens, marched in Bangkok demanding change. When violence broke out between protesters and security forces, the city erupted into confrontation. The scale of public involvement was unprecedented. Faced with crisis, Thanom Kitakachuorn was forced to resign and flee abroad, ending nearly 2 decades of entrenched military dominance. For Thai civil society, this moment became a milestone, remembered as proof that mass mobilization could topple authoritarian rule. Yet the region reminded Thailand of the risks of going too far. In 1975, communist forces triumphed in Laos, Vietnam, and Cambodia. The domino effect that U.S. policymakers had long feared was now reality in the countries bordering Thailand. The Thai government responded by tightening security policies again, determined to suppress leftist movements and prevent communist influence at home. The following years saw a combination of democratic experiments and military interventions, reflecting a nation caught between ideals of freedom and the weight of geopolitical fears. Cultural life told a parallel story. American presence brought consumer products, entertainment, and fashion into daily Thai experience. Elvis Presley's songs, Coca-Cola bottles, Hollywood films, and blue jeans became symbols of modernity among the youth. Ironically, many of the same students who embraced these items were also challenging US-backed regimes and protests. In this way, Cold War Thailand showed both the reach of American influence and the determination of its own people to shape their political future. Its history is one of deliberate reinvention, where kingdoms rose from ashes, leaders walked the tightrope between reform and tradition, and outside pressures were absorbed, reshaped, and made uniquely Thai. This endurance wasn't about isolation. It was about cultural mastery, the ability to blend and adapt without losing self. Understanding how Thailand remained independent through colonial storms and global upheaval reshapes how we view world history itself. Don't forget to like, share, and hit the bell to stay updated. There's more to uncover.